We're holding in the middle of the chapter 29, how the Alter Rebbe explains that when he says that who is the Beinoni is basically his guf, his nefesh bahamis, his animal soul, in contrast to the tzaddik, where the tzaddik is everything about him. As opposed to the tzaddik. In the face of the tzaddik, everything about him is God and godliness. He has transformed already his animal soul, and it was completely nichlal. Everything was his animal soul, and which is the nefesh hachayunis, this which gives life to his body and his flesh. Everything was completely transformed and consumed into the sanctity of the godly soul. And Alter Rebbe adds mamash. Exactly, that's how it is by tzaddikim. It says the story of Hillel when he went to eat. He told his pupils he's going to go. He's doing chesed, he's doing kindness with the poor, the impoverished, which he was referring to his body, because it was a kind of a second party. It was another party. It was like an alien, someone else, because he himself was kuli kodesh. Everything about him was completely Kaddish, and again, not only his godly soul, but his everything about him was completely transformed l'teif to good, as opposed to the Beinoni. We'll begin over here. Although the Beinoni, again, we elaborated on this idea in the previous classes, which, or the previous class, this particular, this specific contrast between the Beinoni and the Tzaddik. Everything is updated. Again, you could look at the Tanya, the kosher tube, but with the text, tanyaonline.com. You have it with the text, and go back to the previous classes easily. And we continue over here. Beinoni, as opposed to the Beinoni, as opposed to the Beinoni, because the essence of the animal soul, which, as we learned in the previous chapters, the earlier chapters, towards the beginning, with Alter Rebbe says, where does the nefesh hachayunis habahamis come from? Misitra achra, which comes from the spirit of impurity. If you remember, though, that Alter Rebbe then, he elaborated, I believe, in this very past class as well. You can see on these above mentioned websites that it was that the nefesh hachayunis habahamis has the ability. The animal soul has the ability to be transformed. It comes from klipas nega. If you remember that neutral klipa, which he spoke about this idea of this notion of neutrality which exists within klipa, the klipas nega, which is this neutral type of klipa, it has the ability to go forward and regress. Go forward means that it has the ability to take it has the ability to be transformed. We gave example, kosher food. It's not essentially holy. It's you can take it and you can move forward with it. You can transform it. Like a bracha, you do a mitzvah with a koch, with the energy of this which you consume, which you ate. Alter Rebbe there says, and chas v'shalom, you could do the opposite. You regress with it. In other words, you could bring it down to the lower level of impurity. We spoke then. There's a shalosh kupsat meis, things which are it's an inherent evil, which is or this which is associated with the nefesh shalosh kupsat meis, and inherently evil, like non-kosher piece of meat. You can't elevate it. Again, we elaborated then in the very much in the earlier chapters. But what I'm mentioning this is over here is because that the nefesh hachayunis habahamis by the Beinoni, or rather one step before the nefesh hachayunis, the animal soul also comes from that neutral klipa, meaning to say that it can be transformed, and that's why the tzaddik can transform it and did transform it. And everything in the tzaddik's life, everything has become kaddish. His animal soul, his body, everything about him is kaddish. The animal soul doesn't express anything animalistic. It became completely transmuted and completely transformed to lakus, as opposed to by the Beinoni. In other words, we mentioned this, that nefesh bahamis comes from this neutral klipa, klipas nega, just to say how it can ultimately be transformed. Because anything comes from the lower level of klipa, the shalosh kupsat meis. Again, these are terms which we expanded on very much, just to bring out clarity and to put things into perspective and place in the earlier chapters. But the lower level Shalosh Klipas Hatmei, which is Shalosh Klipas Hatmei, can never be transformed. I'll give you an example. You can't take a non-kosher piece of meat, make a bracha, consume it, and believe that you're elevating it through learning Torah for 3-4 hours after, with the energy of that non-kosher piece of meat. That doesn't work. On the contrary, not only not elevating it, it's bringing you down to that area because you consumed it. So it's bringing you down. You engage with it. So it's bringing you down into that area where it receives its energy from. That is a lower level of klipa of klipa, which is the sitrach, the energy of impurity, as opposed to the klipa snega, which is the neutral klipa. Again, we use the term, and we explain why we use the term neutral then as well, because it can be transformed. So by the tzaddik it is, but by the Beinoni it's not. The Beinoni has not yet transformed his nefesh bahamis, and therefore remains a behema, to be bold and to be sated as it is, which means it continues to present animalistic lusts, covets, and desires on a constant basis in the life of the Beinoni. Again, he's never called a Rasha because he never gives in to these lusts and temptations. Ever. Because the moment one gives in deliberately, he adheres to the call, to the animalistic message of the Nefesh Bahamis, may it be in action, may it be in speech, may even be in thought, deliberately think something which Torah prohibits the person to think, as an example. And again, these signals are coming from the animal soul, which wants to compel or to suggest that the person should think this inappropriate. And the person gives in, he adheres to that call, and he deliberately, chas v'shalom, knowing that it's an inappropriate thought, thinks about it. Doesn't matter if it's a second or a millisecond. He's called a Rasha according to Torah. Torah brings the ayahs from the Gemara, from the Talmud, proofs from the Talmud. So he's called a Rasha. Beinoni is never called a Rasha, but yet the temptations he has. What does that itself say, the temptations he has? That the Nefesh Bahamis has not been transformed. And it still presents itself as a animal, with animalistic presentations and animalistic desires, animalistic signals, and wants to persuade the person. He wants to rather take over the actions, speech, and thought of the Yid. And that the action, the speech and thought of the Yid, chas v'shalom, to express itself in this very animalistic manner. And again, if it does, it's called a Rasha. But the Beinoni is not, because he doesn't give in to these temptations, but temptations he has, that itself is the greatest demonstration that by the Beinoni, the animal soul has not been transformed. And that's what he says. Because he is not transformed, this animal soul, which is again comes from the sitra achra, from the impure forces, though the higher level, the klipas nega, but still sitra achra it is impure for the energy of the nefesh bahamis comes from these impure forces, which is invested in the blood and flesh of the Beinoni. Was not transformed to good. So if that's the case, if you look at the Beinoni, he adam atzmi, this is who he is. And if you want to classify it, categorize the Beinoni, if you look at who he is distant from God with the ultimate distance. Why? Because the power of lust which exists within this animal soul doesn't stop by the borders between the permissible and the prohibited. So because it's all about doing everything which contributes to its comfort, and these are the animalistic presentations where the animal soul presents to this Yid, to the Beinoni. So once a person is ready to, or once you're dealing rather with animalistic presentations, or presentations which are animalistic, means to say which are there just as we mentioned, this is the life of the animal, whatever contributes to its comfort, that's what it does. And the same thing, these are the messages which we get, do everything which contributes to your comfort. These are the signals, which we all know it, which we receive from the animal soul. So it not necessarily begins with something bad. It could be still in the realm of the permissible. Eat that, sleep a little more, and so on and so forth. So obviously something shouldn't be taken out. Shouldn't be taken out of context. If someone sleeps through a shir and Torah, which he formally has, that borders Aveda, that's Bittul Torah, that's already crossing from the line of the Beinoni into the Rasha. But you're dealing with the permissible. The messages, the signals could be still within the framework of the heter, of this which is permissible, but yet because the messages be an animal, means to say do whatever contributes to your comfort. So then, because of that, there are no formal borders between the permissible and the prohibited. Ideal in concept. In other words, once the messages be an animal, mean to say do whatever contributes to your comfort. So then it's so easy to follow with this message and to cross the border between the permissible and this which is prohibited, because the permissible and the prohibitive have in common many times: this is comfortable to do, this is comfortable to speak, this is comfortable to speak, to think, this contributes to your pleasure, and that contributes to your comfort. So go ahead, act and speak and think something which is categorically prohibited, because its message is not do the prohibited, it's just give in to your comforts, give in to your desires which bring you comfort. So it perhaps starts and initiates with this its presentation maybe initiates with this which is permissible, but you're dealing with ultimately you're dealing with the message: do whatever is comfortable for you, do whatever you derive pleasure from. So there is no real border between the permissible and this which is prohibited. So if you look at the Beinoni with all his efforts and credits, the fact that he's never a Rasha, he never gives in to any taiva, in other words, we never give in to that signal to actualize and to follow through in action or speech or thought with these signals. And again, he deserves a lot of credit, but if you want to look who he is, he has an Nefesh Bahamis, which is vitalizing him, which is the main source of his energy. This is the Nefesh Bahamis, which is invested in his blood and his flesh, which is again was not transformed to good. So what are the signals? The signals could be signals which tell him to desire or present him this presentation, which evokes a desire for him from this Beinoni, even things which are prohibited. So this is not a good. This doesn't look like a good, a pretty picture. And that's what Rebbe says by the Beinoni. He said, if you look at him, if you want to define who he is with all his struggles and with all his efforts and with all his perhaps credits which he gets for all his efforts and struggles and challenges, and which he overcomes, he indeed overcomes. That's why he remains with the term Beinoni. So he is overcoming every single temptation, every single presentation of the Nefesh Bahamis, which wants to tell him, do that, speak that, think that, he overcomes. That's why he's not a Rosh, he's a Beinoni. But with all his efforts, if you want to look at him as who he is, this is an entity which is constantly presented with messages which which can be contrary to God's desire and God's will, not even in the realm of the permitted, but even in the realm of the prohibited. So if you look at the Beinoni itself, because he has such a potent Nefesh Bahamis, he's rachik mi Hashem b'tachlis harichuk. Conceptually, or if you look at him, who this individual, what this is, if you want to classify this entity, this is an entity which the Nefesh Bahamis is overwhelmingly present. Animal souls overwhelmingly present, and with such determination and even potency, which means this message is so potent. Therefore, it's always a struggle. And what is the message? Think that, do that, speak that. And not only this which is permitted, but as we mentioned, because it's about it's about giving into your comfort, so you could even, the presentation is even cross the line of this which is prohibited. So if you look at the Beinoni, it's an entity which is rachok mi Hashem, which is distant from God, with the ultimate distance. And like you can consider, because there is temptation, and the temptation of Nishbamis could also desire things which are prohibited, which are clear, squarely, neged Ritzei Yisbarach, which is contrary to Hashem's Ratzon. Even though doesn't have a desire to actually do them, because he's the Beinoni. The Beinoni doesn't do them, doesn't think, and doesn't speak this which is bepayil, contrary to God's desire. So he doesn't have this type of, he doesn't to do it, will never fall through to actually do it, this which is contrary to God's desire. It's not abhorred, it's not disgusted, it's not disgusting, it's not disgust, it's not abhorrent in his eyes. It's not mos in his eyes. Kibet tzadikim, like tzadikim, which is barleh, like we said before. Which means by a tzaddik, because everything about him is kaddish, and everything was transformed to kedusha, something which is the antithesis to kedusha is ma'us, it's disgust, it's something which the tzaddik is abhorrent with. He abhors this which is contrary to God's desire. Completely ma'us etzlei. He's completely repulsive of this which is contrary to God's desire, because kedusha and klipa, you cannot think of two extreme than this which is holy and pure to this which is unholy and impure. So therefore, a tzaddik, which everything about him has been transformed to kedusha, to holiness. So consequently, anything which is not holy is completely repulsive in the eyes of the tzaddik, abhorrent in the eyes of the tzaddik. By the Beinoni, because his nefesh b'ha'am is still so much intact. So anything which is contrary to God's desire is not ma'us. He won't do it, but you can't say he's disgusted with it, he's repulsive with it. So you're talking about an entity which is not repulsive with something which is contrary to God's desire. That's not particularly a pretty picture. So the Beinoni, from that perspective and point of view, is rachik meshem etach. He's with all his efforts of maintaining the status of a Beinoni, he is distant from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the ultimate distance. And from that perspective and point of view, is garua meshukot u'masuv yeser mibalachai matmei. That he's worse, and he's more mituav, means to say again, it's a lashon tiuv, means to say it's lowly, and it's you could even use the lashon expression. It's abhorrent. Also, mituav is something as well, which you could use that term, but in other words, it's worse and it's lower. What is worse? The Beinoni, again, let's try to read it carefully. Bazahu, the Beinoni is garua meshukatz mituav yeser. He is worse meshukatz melashon sheketz, meaning separated, something which is dirty or lowly. Umituav, the similar connotation. He's worse. The Beinoni yeser balachai matmeim ushkatzim and masim, worse than the impure creatures. And actually shkatzim or masim, which are these creepy creatures which are non-kosher, and we think about them as something like ugh many times. And if you think about it categorically, the Beinoni is worse than them, again with the explanation what the Alter Rebbe gave in the previous chapters, namely in I believe it's the 24th chapter, yes, in the 24th chapter. And the Alter Rebbe explains why categorically is he worse than these balechai matmeim, these impure creatures, because each one of them was created with a particular nature. Excuse me. It was programmed with a particular nature, and as lowly as they are, and as impure as they are, and as unholy as they are, meaning to say because they're not kosher animals or kosher creature and so on. So they are they're classified as tamei, impure, and impure they are, yet they're created with a certain nature, they're programmed with a certain nature, as we just began saying, which is not, they don't do contrary to that nature which is programmed in them. They're not programmed to serve God. So they have a particular nature, and that nature, even though it's aligned with Heipech HaTara, which means with Tumah, with the impure, but that's the way they were created, and that's the way they are.
They have no free will.
Huh?
They have no free will.
Right. Correct. The Beinoni, however, he is susceptible or vulnerable to cross the line or to desire things, actions, speech, and thoughts which are contrary, contrary to God's desire and God's will. All these Balichaim, Tmei, Mishkatzim, and Masim, which we just mentioned, they're programmed in a way, even though again they're classified as Tamei, but they cannot do something which is contrary to God's desire. The Alter Rebbe in the previous chapter, that chapter Chavdali, he brings from Bilam, which was all about Tumah, was all about impurity. But nonetheless, the Torah testifies in Bilam's words, I cannot violate God's dictate. Even Bilam, which is a symbol of impurity in the human race, naturally. And similarly, everything which is created and programmed by God, it might be tummy, but it doesn't go contrary to God's desire. The Beinoni is vulnerable to go contrary to do something or think something or speak something which is completely contrary to God's desire. He won't actually do it. He won't think it. He won't speak it. But he has a taiva, he has a desire to do so, to speak so, to think so. So therefore, categorically, he is worse and lower in level than these balichaim, these creatures which are tummy, which are impure, which again, on their own, certainly the reason that tummy or together, their tummy, their impurity, is because they are distant from the oneness of Hashem, because everything which is close and aligned with the oneness of Hashem is tahir, is pure. Even in the world of animals, the kosher animal can be a sacrifice on the mizbeach, on the altar. It could be eaten for the Shabbos meal, for the other meal. These creatures cannot, because they're a step lower. They come from shalos klipas atmeis. Therefore, this is what makes them tummy. They're receiving their energy from the lower level of impurity, of the spirit of impurity. But man, in this case the Beinoni, because he has a taiva to things which are prohibited, which are contrary to Hashem's ratzon, puts him a step lower than this. These creatures, because they cannot violate, they cannot do contrary to God's desire. Which this is a very strong yet stark statement over here about the Beinoni. So you're dealing with somebody who le'ovar es pi Hashem, he never violates, not in action, not in speech, not even in thought. Which, if you, from a certain perspective and point of view, or someone who doesn't learn Tanya, you would say, oh, this is a real big tzaddik. And a Beinoni is indeed a very high level. If you think about who he is, he never wastes a menasei teiv. Every mitzvah he does right and careful and scrupulous with every mitzvah. As even the mitzvah of bittul teira chas v'shalom never wastes a moment which is a moment which he needs to learn Torah, which is generally 24 hours a day. We're obliged to learn Torah, yet that is not as practical in the life of the Yid, and therefore we have kviyas itma Torah. We have times that are designated to learn Torah, and if a person could learn more, he must learn more Torah, because that is the mitzvah of limdat Torah. The person has to learn Torah at all times, to the exception when he can't, when he has to go work, when he has to accomplish that, and the other, in his connection, and his in his as a human being. So Torah exempts him from learning Torah at the time when he has to go work, as an example. But every other moment, a Yid has to learn Torah. So you're dealing with this Beinoni, because he's somebody who never violates any Aveda. Again, it's not only in Leis as to this which is prohibited to do, this which prohibited to be spoken is prohibited to think, which is that itself on its own with, again, we don't learn Tanya, you think, well, this is a tzaddik, everything about him is aligned with Hashem's ratzon, Hashem's desire. They'd be in action, speech, and even in thought. His thought is pure. He never violates deliberately to look at something, hence to think about something, which HaKadosh Baruch Hu says not to think even for a millisecond. That's grand. That's very special. But more than that, and perhaps even more difficult when it comes to mitzvah say, especially when it comes to the mitzvah of limud HaTorah, if the Beinani has the ability to learn 4 hours in his schedule, and his mentor, his rabbi, told him that these 4 hours, based on the schedule which I reviewed, and again, this is the time you have to work, and this time you have to do this, and then the other, but these 4 hours you should learn Torah, the Beinani learns the entire 4 hours. Because if it's a moment, even if he learns 3 hours and 59 minutes, the other minute is a conducive time to learn. And this Beinani, in other words, in the Yid, in the context of the mitzvah of limud HaTorah, you don't learn that minute, you're not called a Beinani anymore. Because you violated the mitzvah of limud HaTorah. Because that minute was a minute which was conducive to learn, and I did not learn, that's a violation. And therefore you violated your Rosh, you're not a Beinani anymore. So you're dealing with a Beinani, which not only, again, doesn't violate, is completely aligned with God's desire when it comes to leisesa, this which is prohibited to do, to speak or to think. When it comes to mitzvah say, and especially when it comes to mitzvah limud HaTorah, which is literally probably the hardest mitzvah, which one could fulfill to its maximum, or to the way that God wanted the Yid to fulfill this mitzvah, even there he's careful and scrupulous. So this somebody who's such a, he's like I say, if you don't learn Tanya, you would classify him, wow, this is a very big tzaddik. Not such a tzaddik. He has a Yetzer Hara, he has an animal soul, and this animal soul has a desire to do things which are completely contrary to Ratzon Hashem, which no other entity, no other creature in this world has. And therefore, David HaMelech, and therefore, again, this justifies this above mentioned statement of Ozel Gorua Meshukitz Masuv Yesrim Balechai, which are tmeim, these creatures which are impure, because again they have no desire, and it's not possible in their whole makeup, even though they come from the lower level of impurity. Again, that's what renders them tamei, so you can't consume them and so on. But yet they never, in their makeup, they can never violate the desire of their Creator, as opposed to the Beinani has a taiva. Yocheli Sabbath, he could even have a taiva to things which are completely prohibited. So categorically, he's worse. That's what David HaMelech says. Brings it out. David HaMelech says, I'm a worm and not a man. What did he meant to say? He meant to say this very message. Even David HaMelech, which eventually became a tzaddik, says if David HaMelech fasted, Hargi b'tainis, he killed his Yetzer Hara. Meaning to say everything about him was Kodesh, but at a certain point, David HaMelech says, I'm a worm and not a man, because he was trying to demonstrate this very point, that a worm that cannot violate God's desire, and man can. But Alter Rebbe continues in his brackets. Even if you remember, Alter Rebbe spoke about the Beinani. He said at certain times in the life of the Beinani, the day of the Beinani, and the Beinani is similar to the tzaddik. You could equate him to the tzaddik. In other words, that he could experience everything about him is engaging or is involved in godly pursuits and desires. And if you remember, the Alter Rebbe elaborated on this point in 12th chapter, 13th chapter, and periodically mentions it a little later, number of times throughout Tanya, that by the time of davening, Alter Rebbe says it's not to the credit of the Beinani, by the way, if you remember, there's a certain window which opens up from above, which allows the Beinani to connect to God, similar to the connection of the tzaddik. It means to say that even his animal soul, like it's a commercial, it's a partially kind of transformation of the animal soul at the time of prayer. What does that mean realistically? That a person could have a true, tangible, and effective love to HaKadosh Baruch Hu at that time. When we say that when Beinani has the Yetzer Hara is intact, means to say he's not in constant love and in a pleasurably mode when you're dealing with God and godliness. That's the meaning as a Yetzer Hara, that the Yetzer Hara could present the pleasures elsewhere. When a Beinoni davens, if he exercises a healthy prayer at a certain point of his davening, he could really become intimate with his Creator. Means to say, his whole pleasure, in his whole desire, his whole love, is with his Creator. That itself says that the animal soul is not presenting anything animalistic. So at that point, at the time of davening, it's a complete transformation, which is tantamount to the category in the life of the tzaddik. And again, the Alter Rebbe said this is such a special kind of commercial, special time in the status of the Beinoni, or in the experience of the Beinoni rather, that he can completely transform his animal soul to be to kedusha, to godliness, to sanctity, to a state of complete dveikus with the divine. That we said the true prayers, when a person throughout his prayer truly becomes intimate with his Creator. Intimacy is associated with pleasure. So everything about him everything about the Beinoni at the time of prayer is about his love and his connection, his dveikus to God. So that sounds similar to the tzaddik. So why do you tell me that the Beinoni, he has an nefesh bahamis throughout the day, and therefore he could have a taiva, he could have a desire with things which are contrary to the God's desire, and therefore he's lower. That I'm lower than anything else, any other creature. But isn't the Beinoni have the ability to daven, and not only once a day, but a few times a day? Actually, if you remember in this context, Alter Rebbe brought this beautiful Gemara in Brachas Halavai Shis Baladim Kolim Kolik. Halavai, which would be the wishes that the person should be able to daven a whole day. And Alter Rebbe explains this again, aligns this with this special bonus that the Beinoni has, that at the time he davens, his avodah service is similar to the service of the tzaddik, and that's why halavai, let him daven a whole day, so he's, he could experience that tzaddik experience, not only for that hour or 2 hours, but throughout the entire day. Pragmatically, it doesn't usually work out, but if you think about it conceptually, it's the best wish the Beinoni could wish himself, that he could, or even not only wish himself, but exercise to extend his davening, because at the time of davening he has that bonus that his service is similar to the service of the tzaddik, that everything is about his nefesh bahamis, his animal soul is completely transformed to God and godliness, and that is simply the idea of davening, that he has no other desire, he has no other love. He has another lust. He has another other temptation. The temptation and lust and the taiva, in the tainug, his pleasure is to his Creator, with his Creator, and that's why the Beinoni has the ability to stretch his davening longer and longer, if he can. That's the halavai, because at that moment, the time of davening, it's similar to the service of the tzaddik. So now, getting back to this context, Alter Rebbe says, what about the davening? That davening is similar to tzaddik, so he's not like that teilas v'leish. He's not like he doesn't have at the time of davening the nefesh bahamis. Again, at the time of davening, is transformed. So the nefesh bahamis is not presenting him with the signals and presentations with taivas, with desires which are contrary to God's desire. The contrary, the nefesh bahamis is on board with experience of the nefesh elikis of the godly soul, in his connection, in his dveikus, namely in his dveikus, mitich tainug, pleasurely love with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The Alter Rebbe says, this is b'shas hatfilah. So the time of davening, so there was any b'mislamiti legamri. That shows that it's not something which is virtually true. That shows it's not inherently true. The fact, because it's something that removes itself the moment he finishes davening. And he takes off his tefillin and he says, Shalom, he's back to normal. Suddenly he notices that he has other drives and other desires, which again, the Alter Rebbe said in the context that don't fear and let not this take you over and that does not bother you. It should bother you, but it shouldn't disturb your Avodas Hashem, because this is who you are. The time of davening, you have a bonus, but after that, you're a Beinani, you're not a tzaddik, you have an Nefesh Bahamis, and therefore serve God in this fashion. Which fashion? A fashion that despite you have the challenge, you have the temptation, don't give in to that temptation, not in action, not in speech, not in thought, and this is who you are, a Beinani, till Hashem decides to upgrade you. That's what Alter Rebbe says it in a number of places in the context. In other words, when he speaks about Chilefes ve'Iveres Hachat Tefillah, that experience ceases once he finishes davening. The Alter Rebbe puts it in perspective there, explaining the Beinani, who he is. Because again, if we remember, we spoke about this many times in the life of the one who wants to serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Prior to learning Tanya, there's a lot of confusions. He davens, he thinks he's in love with God, he goes out the streets, all of a sudden he has other temptations that he has to hold himself back of looking something inappropriate. What do you have to hold yourself back? It's because you have a desire to that. And then you think to yourself, I have a desire to God, a desire to that. And that's why over the years, until the Alter Rebbe came with this clarity about this great status of the Beinani, this great Aveda, the great Aveda of the Beinani, yet he has an animalistic soul. His Yetzer Hara is fully intact, caused confusion into the Avodah Hashem, to one who served God. Now, Alter Rebbe brought clarity. This is who you are. By davening, you have that bonus that you can completely transform your Nefesh Bahamis. In other words, you could have an intimate relationship with your Creator. Intimacy means to say that your whole pleasure is with your dveikus, with your connection with your Creator. After davening, it's a different story. But in this context, Alter Rebbe says, don't tell me about his prayer, which again, that there his Nefesh Bahamis, animalistic soul, is completely transformed, and therefore he is not lower. In other words, you can't say he's Garua Meshukatz, he's lower than the Bali Chaim Atmeim, these impure creatures. Because again, you want to tell me it's because it's davening? No. The fact that after davening it completely disappears, that shows that it's not part and parcel of the Beinani. With something, with a famous expression, emes, something which is true from beginning to the end. Rebbe also brought that pasuk regarding emes by a tzaddik as opposed to the Beinani. It's not emes. If you know the word emes has the three letters: Aleph, Mem, and Taf. Aleph is the first letter, Mem is the middle letter of the alphabet, and Taf is the end. Because that's what truth is all about. It's truth from beginning to the end. There's no such a thing half true. I mentioned once beautiful Vart, I think it was the Kotzker. I think I mentioned this class as well. It's amazing. It's such a beautiful, beautiful Vart, so beautifully and poetically said that 99%. See, I'm not saying it right. The Lashon was like this: 99% of emes is 100% sheker. I'm probably not saying it right. I remember, but this is the point. The point is, something which is true from beginning to the end. There's no such thing half truth. And if it's 99% truth and 1% it's not true, so it's 100% false. The Alter Rebbe says the same thing over here. You're telling me about the Beinani and the time of prayer. Even a few times throughout the day, he could pray, and therefore he's similar to the tzaddik. What happens after prayer? After even experiencing, exercising a healthy prayer, the way a Beinani can pray with a bonus which is given milmaila from the heavens above, as we mentioned, a special window opens up which allows the Beinani to connect to his Creator in a way which you look at him at the time of prayer, which is very similar to the life of the tzaddik, which means his only pleasure is only in God and godliness. It's wonderful, but the fact that after the prayer he goes back to his original state shows that that's not his true category and classification. Therefore, we'll stop over here, but therefore, when the Alter Rebbe speaks about dealing with the problem, again, to keep it in the context, why is the Alter Rebbe mentioning over here, classifying the lowliness of the Beinani? Because the Alter Rebbe is telling us, based on this which we learned in the very beginning of the chapter, when the Beinani sees that the Eira Neshama, the light of the Neshama, is not penetrating his body, the point is to break himself. If you remember again with the example of the Rosh Hashiva in Gan Eden, set a log It's the right material for the fire to catch and hold itself and carry itself. But yet, the log is stiff, the fire will not penetrate. And he says similarly, when the Beinoni notices Gufa, that his body does not carry the Neheda, the Nishmasa, you got to break it. Now Rebbe shows you different ways, and told again in the previous classes, he explains the Beinoni, or he gives the Eitzah, the suggestion rather, to the Beinoni how to break himself apart, to allow the Eira Neshama to come in, to penetrate. And one of the things he says, a broken spirit, a broken heart, and we ask the question, he's a Beinoni breaking his spirit, breaking his heart, isn't he breaking the godly energy? Doesn't that saying he's breaking the godly energy associated with his beautiful godly service as a Beinoni? This is why the Alter Rebbe says, absolutely not. The opposite is true. Because everything about the Beinoni, who he really is, it's an entity with all his efforts and with all his credits, it's still an entity which by definition is Rachik mi Hashem, is distant from God, with the ultimate distance because the fact that he has a Nefesh Bahamis, an animal soul, and Yetzer Hara which is fully intact, which can and has a desire even to do things which are completely contrary to God's, to Ratzon Hashem. So this is who he really is, and therefore breaking with a Ruach Nishbara, a broken spirit and a broken heart, these are all things which are healthy in the life of the Beinoni, because this and only this will allow ultimately the Eira Neshama, the light of the Neshama, to penetrate and burn and carry nicely within the system of the Beinoni. Have a great night.